on Anuradha Vedic Astrology. Today we have James Braha with us with a lot to be discussed on the Braha Sutras. Without much ado, you can see the cover that we have in the back about the Braha Sutras. I'll go ahead and ask James. James, the book is finally out as a physical copy and an ebook. So how do you feel giving so much time to a book and dedicating so many months in everything that it went? So how does it feel to be having the masterpiece in your hand now?
It feels like a big relief. Before I talk about that, let me just announce that people that want the hard copy, they can buy it from Amazon in the US or Canada, England, etc. But for people in the Far East, which is most of your viewers, it's on ebook on Google Play, Barnes and Noble, and Apple Books. I think Google Play is probably the one they use. Okay. So I said this in an interview the other day. What feels great is that the Saturn Dasha, Saturn is my best planet. My first book was written in Saturn Bhukti. Saturn and Rahu are really my best planets. And every time Saturn comes along, my first book looks like a classic, the ancient Hindu. Then there's 5 books in between. And then comes the Braha Sutras, which is even more classic. I never coined the term the Braha Sutras. My student did that, and it's brilliant. So the book is so Saturnian in a good way. So I'm very, very thrilled about that. At the same time, I was telling my wife about a week ago, we were walking and I said, I'm sad. And she said, why are you sad? And I said, because the writing of this book was the most fun book I have ever written. It was the hardest in the sense that it took over a year. It started in November 2020. It came out in March of 2022. Normally my books don't take that long. This one took longer, but it was so much fun to write because every time I would write a sutra, not every time, but there were lots of sutras that were not planned. When I started, I just planned to give 200 tips of different things that I thought that astrologers should know. But the book took on a life of its own. And oftentimes there were insights that would pop up. They would just pop up. And when I was done writing that sutra, I would run to Vashti. I'd say, listen to this sutra. And she would get excited and I would get excited. I mean, there was, when you write a book, it's so anticlimactic and you work on it day after day, week after week, month after month. Finally, it comes out. And if it's astrology, it usually takes a couple of years before it gets in all the right hands. But this one, at least 3 days a week, I would run to her and say, look at what I just wrote. Isn't this great? So I missed that. So anyway, so I said, the reason that I'm sad is because I can never do this again. I might do something else that's nice, but this is from 1978, 78, when I started astrology, and then from 1982, when I learned Jyotish, all the way till now. This is a result of everything that I've learned over 40 years of practice. And there's still plenty that I don't know. There's still plenty of fundamentals that are hard to figure out. But having a book that is this experiential, if you go on Amazon and you read the reviews, people say, this guy just saved me 10 years of study because I was wondering about this and I was wondering about that, trying to figure this out, and he said, this guy just saved me all this time. And that, I think, is, there's so few astrology books that I really love. One that I love is Isabel Hickey's. I've said it over and over because she wrote it when she was 70. So you have a lifetime of wisdom in that book. And this is a similar thing, only it's mostly Jyotish. There's some Western stuff in there, but it's mostly Jyotish. So I feel thrilled that I have it out there for the world, but then I say, what do I do now?
Don't worry, you'll come up with something better. I hope, I really hope so. And I wish and I really hope that your book goes a long way in establishing many other astrologers with your experience. So moving forward, James, what do we have for our viewers today?
I thought I would talk about Rahu and Ketu. It's an interesting subject, Rahu and Ketu, and I know people are thrilled with it. And one of the sutras in the book, I think it's probably there. So there's 7 sections to the book. There's the being, how to be an astrologer. There's the doing, which is the bulk of the book, maybe 120 sutras on what you have to do. Then there's the nodes. Then there's the upayas, the gems and mantras. Then there's the predictions. And then there's the odds and ends. And I believe that the very first sutra under Rahu and Ketu is, don't fall for the superstition of Rahu and Ketu. So the superstition comes because of the fact that the story of Rahu and Ketu is a story. It's an allegory. It gives you an idea. You may take it literally. I don't take most of the stuff literally. I take it symbolically. And it's a wonderful, it really is a wonderful explanation for Rahu and Ketu. Rahu is the head of the dragon, the head of the demon, and it represents insatiable cravings and desires for power. And Ketu is the bottom portion of the Rakshasa, the serpent, demon, snake, Rakshasa, and it represents the opposite of Rahu. The opposite of worldly power and cravings of worldly power is everything spiritual, metaphysical of the other world. But the problem is that with astrology, we always read the books and we always hear the teachers. But the most important element in this field is to learn to think for yourself, which is, I think, sutra number 8 in the book. The most important part is your thinking process. So there's a lot to be said about the story of Rahu and Ketu, but it gets ingrained in people's minds. Uh-oh, I'm coming to the dasha of Rahu, and Rahu is a Rakshasa. I'm coming to the bhukti of Ketu, and Ketu is the bottom of a Rakshasa. That doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold up. You can't consider Rahu and Ketu bad in all cases. It depends where it's placed. It depends how it's aspected. And they both have very, very specific, rulerships and things like that. So we'll start with Rahu. So one of the things that you have to do as an astrologer is to get in touch with the planets. Now you never get in touch with the houses. The houses are not like part of us. The planets are part of us. When I'm speaking to you right now, you're hearing my Mercury in Libra in the 6th house. That's what you're hearing. If you hear somebody who has Mercury in Pisces, they may be scattered, they may be musical, they may be all over the place. You're hearing Mercury within them. The planets are within us. We are part of them. We're not part of the houses. I'm not the 5th house. I'm not the 3rd house. That's a part of astrology that you can learn through books and through teachings. But the planets are the basis of everything. So when you first learn astrology, it's not that you're learning that Mercury is the intellect and the sun is the father and the confidence. It's that you have to identify the sun in your own self and how that comes out. And a person who has Venus conjunct Saturn, you see the way they behave. There's a certain sadness oftentimes because Venus is too, the planets are within us more so than houses and aspects and things like that. So you have to think of the planets. Now, when I think of Rahu is the most materialistic of all the planets. Now, if I think of Rahu and I think of Sun, Moon, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, I can let go of Venus, Moon, Jupiter, Mercury. They're not like Rahu at all. The sun and Mars, not so much Saturn, but the sun and Mars, there's a not a connection, but they represent similar things in the sense that the sun is confidence. So when I think of the sun, and this is something I recommend that students do, you find somebody with a very strong sun and you watch their confidence and their father. You find somebody with a very weak sun. Maybe the sun is in the 10th degree of Libra, completely fallen, aspected by Saturn. You see their lack of confidence. You see the problems with the father. So you identify what the sun is. So when I think of the sun, the first thought I always have is Jack Nicholson, the actor. If you watch his acting, he has a certain kind of confidence. I mean, he's gone now, he doesn't even act anymore. But if you watch his roles, in fact, there's in Chinatown, when an actor is very confident, they'll take their time with their lines. They don't just spit them out because they're confident. And the director said, Jack, listen, you got to speed things up. He said, give me a chance, Roman. He said, I got a 300-page script here, speed it up. But his confidence was very, very strong. And so that's what I think of. And when I think of Mars, so the sun is very down to earth and practical. It's the confidence, it's the willpower. Mars is very aggressive and very assertive and very mechanical. And I could think of, say, Bill Gates. Mars is conjunct with Mercury in Mercury's own sign, Virgo. And Mars is aspected by a nearly full moon. So his Mars is very strong, and he has mechanical, technical skills that he uses for computers. And his Mars also allows him to be aggressive, to put his desires above the other companies, to do things that make the other companies sue him. They say, you're not being fair. Well, he's being Marsy, he's being assertive and aggressive. So you have the sun, you have Mars, now you have Rahu. Now Rahu is the symbolism of a Rakshasa is very good, a snake, a demon, because Rahu has no intelligence connected to it. Rahu is an instinctual craving and desire for power. It is the most outgoing. Mars is very outgoing. All the presidents have very strong Mars. They're outgoing and they're bossy and they're leaders. Rahu it's not that it's aggressive, like I'm going to overtake you, I'm going to overtake you. It's not that. That's what Mars is. I'm going to put my desires above yours. And the sun is, I'm confident, I'm the leader. Rahu is not that. Rahu is, I want the world. There's no thought process involved. It's just, I want the world. Give it to me. I'll take it. Give it to me. I want everything. So when I went into so I was very, very mild and very, very meek and very, very gentle. And then I went into the Rahu Dasha and I was pursuing enlightenment. Nothing mattered but enlightenment. And then around the age of 26, 27, 28, somewhere in there, the Rahu Dasha hit. The spiritual stuff was over. I immediately went from being full vegetarian to suddenly eating chicken and fish. Suddenly, so it becomes very worldly. And immediately the idea of working on myself and my own enlightenment, it just went out the window. Suddenly, my Rahu's in the 10th house, which is career. Suddenly, I wanted the world. I want the world to know what I know. It's just, it's just a craving, okay? But when I think of Rahu the most, I think of the Beatles, and I think particularly of John Lennon. So John Lennon was, in a sense, the leader of the Beatles, okay? They were all part of a great group, but he had started the group, and he had the most outgoing personality of all. And when he entered the Rahu Dasha around 1962, that's when the Beatles all of a sudden rose to this huge fame. But if you look at a clip of the early Beatles, you look at the energy, the raw, unfiltered, just raw energy that comes out of them, it's enormous. Now, McCartney has Mars conjunct Pluto, which is very Marsy, very outgoing and worldly. But Lennon has Rahu in the first house, in the best sign possible, in Virgo, and conjunct Mars. There is a personality that jumps out. And from the very beginning, even when they weren't very good, there's these stories when they were younger and they were watching these other bands play, and the other bands heard the Beatles and they said, they're not very good. But the Beatles said, we're better than all of them. It was just instinctual. They weren't really good at that point. They went to Hamburg, they became much better. But the point is, they were completely Rahu-like. It was no analysis to it. It's just this raw energy that comes out at the audience and the audience goes wild. It's very instinctual. And if you take the two most outgoing planets, so the most aggressive outgoing is of the planets, not of the nodes, is Mars. And then you take Rahu, which is, I want the world, cravings and desires for the world. Lennon has not only Rahu in the first house, in Virgo, he's also got it conjunct with Mars. And if you've ever known people that have Mars conjunct Rahu, the sexual energy and the virility is off the charts, because you're taking these two aggressive, worldly energies and putting them together. So it is unfortunate for people to think that Rahu is some terrible influence that's going to cause problems. When I went into Rahu, I had 18 years of big career. When John Lennon went in, they gained their fame. It takes you out to worldly power. Now, if that planet is not well placed, if Rahu is conjunct with Saturn, you're going to have big problems. If Rahu is conjunct with Mars and it's not in a good side, say it's in the marriage house, it's going to be bad news. If it's Rahu and Mars in the fourth house, it's not going to be good for the mother, although the mother could be incredibly powerful and successful and worldly. But that's basically the nature of, so in the scriptures, in a lot of texts, it'll say that Rahu is like Saturn and Ketu is like Mars. That is the worst analysis that I've ever heard. The only thing that's similar is that Rahu is very long, 18 years, and Saturn is 19 years, and Ketu is 7 years, and Mars is 7 years. That's the only connection. Ketu is not at all like Mars. In fact, Ketu is the exact opposite of Mars. So let's talk about Ketu now for a second. And of course, Rahu is best placed in the Upachayas 3, 6, 10, and 11. Now, Rahu's not going to help the younger sibling in the third house. I mean, it might make them powerful and worldly, but it won't make a good relationship necessarily. Ketu in the third's not going to make a good relationship. It could make this sibling spiritual, but it won't make a good relationship. Take Ketu. In order to understand Ketu, okay, first of all, it's the opposite of world cravings for worldly power. Okay, we understand that. So it's everything psychic and metaphysical and spiritual and astral and otherworldly. But in order to understand Ketu, you have to have a basis in spirituality to understand it. Because it's not enough to simply say Ketu is spiritual and metaphysical. You have to understand the nature of existence. You have to understand that the world is a dream. The world is Maya. It's an illusion. The world comes and goes like a dream. It comes and it goes. It's not lasting. It has no real nature. But there is something that has real nature, and that's called consciousness or awareness. It's the consciousness or awareness that was never born and never dies, was never created. It simply is. And the world shows up within the consciousness or the awareness. And you can call the consciousness God, you can call it whatever you want, but it is the ultimate, it is all one. There is not two, and it simply is. It's never going away. So when you study with a guru, they will tell you you want to have in life 200% of life. You want to have the 100% of life where you get married and you have a family and you get wealthy and you become famous. Whatever it is that your desires are, that's 100% of life in the material world. Then there's the other 100% of life, which is the absolute, the unmanifest, the awareness or the consciousness. And that's why people meditate, to get in touch with the awareness, to get in touch with the consciousness, which is always there. Ketu is that. Ketu is as close as you can get planetary-wise to the absolute, to the consciousness. So if Ketu is on the ascendant, or Ketu is with the sun or the moon, well, not so much the sun, more the moon and the ascendant. If Ketu is on the ascendant or close to the moon, that person has 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the absolute, in the unmanifest, in the spiritual world from which we came. Where did we come from before our body and mind and thoughts, feelings, and body? Where were we before that? We were consciousness, we were awareness, we were in that other world. So a person that has Ketu on the ascendant, or the moon next to the ascendant, or the ascendant ruler next to Ketu, they've got 1 foot in the world and 1 foot still in the spiritual metaphysical world. This is extremely important to understand because, so I told you, when I think of Rahu, I think of my Rahu Dasha, my cravings for fame, all that stuff, career. I think of of John Lennon just going out there and just overpowering the world with charisma. So what do I think of when I think of Ketu? The Indian race, the Indian. So when I go to Iceland to do horoscopes, 75% of the horoscopes, the 8th house is a monster house. Now, do they all live long? Most of them do. They live to 100, 105. They live really long. Are they metaphysical? Because the 8th house, it's just one of the things. In Iceland, they all have strong 8th houses. I did a lecture there. 45 out of 50 people wanted a reading. That's never happened before. It's just cultural. If you go to Switzerland, all the charts look like the people are rich. They're not all rich, but they look rich because it's in their genetics. So when I do a horoscope for Indians, one of the hardest things for me is this. I'm looking at the chart, and I do a lot of charts for Indians now because of my YouTubes. So I'm looking at the chart, and Ketu is just dominating the horoscope. Will I bet whether the person is focused on enlightenment, meditation, psychic, and metaphysical? I won't bet. Sometimes, but I won't bet on that because it's in their genetics. There's been so many generations after generations after generations of not eating animal foods. That is bringing them closer to nature. That is getting rid of the aggression. It's bringing them to the psychic metaphysical world. It's who they are. One of the sutras in the book, one of the important sutras in the book is, when you're looking at a horoscope, determine who the person is versus what they do. So a person might be who they are is a counselor. They counsel people and they help people, and yet their career, it could be engineer. And yet they're constantly helping people and nurturing them because it's who they are, because the moon is in the 1st house and because there's 6th house planets. There's a difference between who you are and what you do. Now, sometimes there's not. Sometimes, like Santanam, my teacher, I was writing about Santanam, my first astrology mentor, and who he was an astrologer, a metaphysician. What he did was astrology, and there was no difference. And you have artists, who they are as an artist, and what they do is the arts. You have a lot of artists that are artists, but what they do is something completely different because they have to earn a living. Or you have a person who's a spiritualist, but what they do is they do medicine, or they do engineering, or they do computers because they have to make a living. So there's a difference between who you are, what you do. So for the Indians, who they are mostly is very Ketu-like. So these are generalizations, and you have to, I know they're generalizations and all, but when you're around Americans, you usually see you see brash, assertive, outspoken. When you see Indians, they're quiet. They're not that they can't be not that they can't be aggressive, but they're intuitive. They're psychic. So what I'm saying here also is that people that are Ketu-like are very real. They are connected in the same way. When I was learning Advaita, non-duality, when men study non-duality, it's, oh my God, the world's not real. This is incredible. And it's a big deal. And you see the women and they go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I feel that. Yeah. It's not, because they're closer to nature. They're closer to nature. They're closer to reality. So when things happen, they don't have these huge reactions like men do, because men are so far away from nature, because they're the masculine side, they're the aggressive, they're the worldly side. Women are closer to nature, they're closer to reality. So it's not such a big deal. So Ketu people are they generally don't like bragging. They don't like excessive. They're very, intuitive and sensitive, shy. They can be the other things, but their nature is Ketu-like. So Ketu, if I was going to explain Ketu, instead of saying how does Ketu relate to the sun and Mars and Saturn, no, I would say Ketu. If I want to relate Ketu to a planet, I'm going to relate it first to the benefics. So Ketu also, I'll get to that in a second. Ketu is like Neptune. They are so similar, I cannot tell you. They both rule the illness of cancer. They both rule illusion, deception, drugs, alcohol. Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. It's the higher octave of Venus. Isn't it interesting that Ketu, to me, this is purely my opinion, but to me, Indians, they are so Ketu-like. And guess which country has the biggest film industry in the world? India, Bombay. So it's very Ketu-like, and so they're very good with film and photography and things like that. It's hard to relate Ketu to the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter specifically, but Ketu is much closer to the benefics than it is. Ketu is not at all aggressive like Mars. It's not at all confident like the sun. It's not at all worldly like Rahu. If Ketu is anything, it's the sensitivity of the moon. It's the artistic nature of the Venus. And then Jupiter, the thing about Jupiter is spiritual. In that sense, it's like Ketu, but Jupiter is luck and expansion and things like that. So Ketu is really different from all of the, Rahu is kind of like Mars and kind of like the sun, it's worldly, but Ketu's not like anything else, really, because the planets are worldly. Venus is the beauty and love. Moon is mother and nurturing, and Jupiter is religion and philosophy, and Ketu is the other part of life. It's in the same way water is to a fish. It's the awareness or consciousness that is with us all the time. We don't even notice it. And so Ketu is quite different like that. Now, if you, there's two sutras in the book. I think I've mentioned them before, but it's worth mentioning again. In the Western horoscope, the south node and north node, Ketu is the south node, Rahu is the north node. In the Western system, the south node tells you what you did in past lives and what you're comfortable with. The north node is what you are going toward. So my Ketu's in the fourth house. I already did home and family in past lives. Now I'm going toward the world and career. So wherever the north node is, it's a natural point to try to learn about that area, okay? So if there is a planet, any planet near within 5 or 10 degrees of Rahu, it doesn't say anything about what you're going to do, but it says that if you go toward that planet, it's going to be so easy to access because you're already headed toward the North Node placement anyway. So if my North Node is in the career house, fine. If Venus is next to it and I decide to go toward beauty, sweets, film, anything Venusian, it's going to be easy. If Jupiter is near, and this is something where, you know, people have thought, oh, any planet near Rahu, it's like it's next to Saturn or Mars. It's not at all. First of all, Rahu doesn't hurt the way Ketu does. Ketu really damages planets because the planet near Ketu is off in another world. It can't function in this world. Planets near Rahu, they get bruised a little bit. That's about it, just a little bit. But whatever, if Saturn is near the North Node, then Rahu's going to be in trouble. Your Rahu dasha is not going to be easy or good if it's right next to Saturn. However, if you go toward Saturn, you say, I want to go toward land or real estate or carpentry, it's going to be a cinch. If Mercury is near Rahu, Rahu's going to benefit because it's near Mercury. But if you go to, so Rahu dashas will be good. But if you go toward Mercury, writing, teaching, communications, media, it's a breeze. It just comes very, very easily.
Yeah,
That's very,
point on, James, because in my head, I've been looking into charts and it does work. I see people drifting in that area flawlessly.
The thing is, some people will go toward, some won't. You have to tell them whether you want to or not is your choice. But if you go toward that, you will get there very easily, be very easy. The other thing, this is a sutra in the book as well. This is critical, just really critical. And I have to tell you, some of these sutras, this one I'm about to talk about in particular, this one came up during the writing of the book. This is what was so much fun in the book was I'd be sitting writing and an idea would come up and suddenly, you know, it's something that I understood, but I had never put into words. And this is that Rahu is a malefic, but it's also powerful cravings and desires. So if it's in a good house, Rahu in the 10th is great for career. Rahu in the 11th is great for friends and groups, powerful friends, large sums of money, things like that. But it is a malefic by nature, okay? But it depends on the house that it's in, okay? So let's say Rahu is in the 5th house. That is not good for the mind, and it's not good for the peace of mind, and it's not really good for children in terms of the relationship. But the children will be powerful and worldly. The mind will be completely practical and down to earth. Those are good. But it's essentially a malefic. If I had a choice, I wouldn't put Mars and Rahu in the 5th. I'd put it in a Upachaya house, 3, 6, 10, and 11. Now here's the thing. If you have that Rahu in the 5th, which could be bad for the relationship with children, which could be bad for the peace of mind. If you put it in the 5th and you have it aspected tightly by a benefic or conjunct a benefic, it turns around completely and becomes this wonderful source of power. This is not the case with Saturn. If you put Saturn in the 5th house, it hurts children, it hurts the mind. If you have it aspected by a benefic, it will ease up. It will ease up on the Saturn, making it not as bad, but it will not turn it around to where the Rahu just becomes this magnificent worldly influence. I'll give you a better example. The one I love is Rahu in the 2nd. Rahu in the 2nd or the 8th, they're terrible. They're bad for family life, meaning the 18 years you're growing up. And then it creates tumultuous upbringing. And then in family life, later on in life, if it's not aspected well, it just creates problems. If that Rahu is conjunct with Venus or conjunct with Jupiter, that person's going to be filthy rich. the Venus will turn the Rahu. It's like it turns it into a benefic. And then the troubles in the family life are not there either. It just, so in my experience, in my opinion, you have to test it for yourself, but you have to use a lot of cases, okay? And you have to use people, not celebrities. Rahu is affected more than other planets. Now, Mercury, when I learned astrology in 1982 in India, the Hindu system, right away he told me Mercury is fickle, Mercury can go either way. And I wrote that in my books, that Mercury could be benefic or malefic, depending upon how it's aspected. But this is not the same. There is something about Rahu, not Ketu. There's something about Rahu that when it's well aspected, it functions so incredibly well for worldly benefits. So it's very important to understand.
Thank you so much, James, for this wonderful video on Rahu and Ketu. Beautiful insights, and we realize that this comes from a wealth of 45 years of experience and more. Thank you so much, James, for your...
Please hit the bell icon for fresh updates. Don't forget to like, share, and comment on the videos, and please subscribe to our channel.